All right, we are live, everyone. Welcome
Wow.
to Bible study online Wednesday nights. We are glad you are joining us, and as you are joining us, if you can comment that you're here, so we can see who all is watching with us, or if you're watching this later, go ahead and comment. We'll, respond back to you throughout the week. We have not only one guest of Reverend Sandy Hurd, but we also have Reverend Rosie, the dog, who is probably going to make some more appearances, and in fact already has. So we get the
She
joy of your
wants to
dog now as our.
remind everyone about blessing of the animals on Sunday, actually, is what's happening.
I've
She
heard
wanted
about that.
she's going to lay
Animal
down
paw.
now. Yeah. Rosie and I are going to be preaching on Sunday
I
night
need
at
I
Blessing
need
of
a
the Animals.
paw.
Yeah. And yeah, so that's Sunday at 4:30. So don't forget, so now she's going to lay down. So maybe that was exactly her motive.
I think that probably was. Thank you, Rosie, for that reminder. We're
Good
really,
job.
yeah, very glad of that. So, Kaylin, do you want to introduce Sandy to everybody?
Yes. So thanks everybody for joining us again tonight as we continue this weird, wonderful Wednesday night Bible study. We've had all kinds of guests on, and we've had, different levels of connection. It's great when somebody pulls it up on their phone and I get to hear myself again.
Yeah,
It happens every time. So Sandy is probably, I would say, one of my very, very, very best friends from seminary. And Sandy, bless her, she roomed with me in Israel for 17 days and was still my friend after that. Sandy is a pastor after my own heart, because Sandy's like me. Sandy's always taking notes. Sandy's always prepared. Sandy's always over prepared. And Sandy was with me from the very beginning. We were in a spiritual formation class together, our first semester of school. I think were we the only girls in there?
Yes.
Yeah. So it just,
at Perkins.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It was a time you signed up for your time kind of deal. So
Yeah.
I think it's just what worked for us. But yeah, Sandy was there with me from the very beginning, and Sandy's a pastor at First UMC Rockwall, and so she's been there for 3 years now.
Yeah. Little over 3.
Yeah, and we know that they are so lucky to have her. But Sandy was commissioned last year, so we're going up for her ordination interview this January. So we'll say some prayers and some virtual laying
Nice.
of hands after. Which Sandy, David's on the board now, so now you've got another friendly face in there.
Yes.
I'm happy
Yeah,
to
it'll
help
be
out.
great. He'll be great. But yeah, Sandy's married to her husband, obviously, and she's got 2 great, wonderful teenage kids that are all so, so, so kind. Sandy's part of the group that does Friendsgiving every year with us. And Sandy, I don't know how much of your story you want to tell, but this is not Sandy's first career. If you want to tell us the story a little bit.
Yeah. So I started off in corporate America in human resources, progressed through the ladder and the ranks of HR. And I did that for 18 years. And I left a position as vice president of human resources with the whole team reporting to me. And one day,
Wow.
epiphany, talked to my husband, talked to my friends, and then talked to my CEO and said, I'm going to be out of here and going to seminary. So thankfully he's a devout Jewish man. And he said, I am not standing in the way of God. No way.
Usually doesn't work out well anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. So it was a fun experience to do something totally different, but incorporate a lot of my HR skills into what I'm doing in the church world.
Yeah, it's
so
a good
Sandy
skill to
brings
have.
such a realm of experience that we got to really glean from in school. We had an HR expert with us all the time. But I think one thing I've always admired about you, Sandy, is I know that you take your calling just so very seriously, because you had to give up a lot more than what kind of us first career folks really understand. And I have so much respect for you and for your family for that. And yeah, thanks for being on here with us.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything about you in your little mini bio?
No, it's kind of funny. Earlier today, somebody called me for some HR advice, and as I was talking to them about one of the acts that was passed to help out employees during the COVID pandemic. They're like, wow, you really like light up about this. You really love it. Why aren't you in HR? Well,
you're just utilizing the human resources of the kingdom of God now, putting them in the best place and chastising them perhaps when they need to be.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking of a similar story. As a side note, there was a guy named Nate Berniking that I went to seminary with. It was a friend of mine who was a lawyer in St. Louis and like was of the notoriety that he represented Nelly on a case one time. Wow. And that's somehow awesome. Through all of this, then felt the call to ministry. So now he's kind of a legal expert in the Missouri conference and is on the cabinet now. But yeah, it's another story of wow, what did you leave to do this? And hopefully finding more reward, right?
Yeah.
Also, is it Nelly on Dancing with the Stars now?
Nelly?
Yes.
I don't know.
I'm not sure that Nelly has made the leap to Dance with the Stars from Country Grammar. But we'll see.
85% sure he's on Dancing with the Stars this season.
Oh, okay. Well,
but I have not followed. I only just watched the cast and then I didn't watch a single episode.
I have never seen Dancing with the Stars, so I can't speak with any kind of credibility whatsoever.
Neither.
Oh my word! I've only watched one season all the way through.
So I'm just going to put a comment up here real fast so Kathy Bradford is an HR manager ready for a new assignment. So Kathy, just know that God may call you today while we're talking here into just a new path. So I don't know if that's going to make you turn off the Bible study or keep listening, but just know that's a possibility.
Kathy Bradford, probably appreciate this, but 2 months ago I updated our employee handbook. It has not been updated since 1998.
Ooh.
Hey, here's a fun game. Ask me how old I was when your employee handbook was updated.
I don't know.
I think diapers were involved. So just barely not.
Maybe not. I was pretty advanced. Come on.
Yeah, 98.
Wow. That is, I mean, and churches really, we need HR people, whether it's lay people or people like you who kind of second career this business, because I can tell you in seminary, they don't teach us anything having to do with HR. And in my first 2 years, I've ran into more experiences that have required needing some HR pieces than I ever thought. I don't have any problems with David, just to clear that up while we're all here.
It's been more she needs legal counsel because I've sued her at least 3 or 4 times. I won't go into it, but
Yeah, you're right. Like with recruiting and hiring and performance management, how to have those conversations with people. But like positive conversations too in performance management, which is kind of lacking sometimes in the in the church staff world.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Sandy, we're glad you're here with us. We're almost 9 minutes in, which is usually our shoot the bull time. As we're waiting for people to jump on here. So I think I was supposed to MC and write the questions today, but Keri Lynn mercifully took this on for me because we have multiple funerals and other things going on at the church this week. So Keri Lynn, you want to lead us?
Yes. So we are going to go through a whole book of the Bible tonight, which we have never done on this Bible study. I know.
It's such a long one.
It's really long.
Buckle up, everybody. We're doing one of those all-nighters. Just kidding. So Sandy, we've done Philippians. We've done Old Testament, New Testament. So we did Philippians, and then we did Micah, then we did Mark, then we did Ruth. And so we kind of have these 2 random weeks we wanted to fill with something. And I just randomly picked 2 John because I thought there were 6 chapters in Ruth instead of 4, even though I should have just gone to look at them. It's just proof they don't teach us to memorize the Bible in seminary, y'all. They don't teach us how to pronounce weird names. They don't teach us how to memorize it. I still have to use a table of contents to find some of the prophets. It's literally fine.
We give our confirmation students those little tabs you can stick on. If you want some of those, go look in Allison's office.
Second third graders. Yeah.
Second John, though, is one of those that as you're flipping through, you can pass it up 4 or 5 times because it's a page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got a study Bible, so I've got an introduction page, and then it's the book, and then that's it. So, so one of the things that I didn't know as I started researching for today, so Second John is not included in the Revised Common Lectionary. And so if you preach lectionary in a church, which we don't at Creekwood, I don't know if you do at Rockwall.
We do.
Okay, so we'll explain this for a second. Do you want to explain what the lectionary is, Sandy? Because I may butcher it because we don't use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Revised Common Lectionary, one of the things I like most about it is that it's not a Methodist thing. It's something that the Catholic faith and other Protestant traditions will use. And it essentially has a 3-year cycle, year A, B, and C. And they just keep cycling through. And each Sunday, there's an Old Testament passage, there's a Psalm, there's a New Testament passage, usually a gospel passage, and then something else like an epistle. And so you can choose from one of those texts to preach on. My favorite thing is sometimes when you talk to somebody who's maybe Catholic and they're like, oh my goodness, we also preached on that. What a coincidence. Not really a coincidence, but it's this really cool idea of just the whole body of Christ being on the same page of the scripture and learning and diving into that a little deeper. But there are challenges with it too, because it's not all inclusive. Things like this get left out. Poor Gospel of John also gets ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, so Sandy's right. So we preach at Creekwood, we kind of come up with sermon series based on kind of really what we're learning, what we're experiencing, what we're hearing from our congregation members. And I think there's so much merit to both of doing the lectionary and of going sermon series based. I had one pastor one time do it.
One of the great things about the lectionary is sometimes you pull up passages that are really very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so by doing preaching from the Revised Common Lectionary, you can force yourself out of your comfort zone and preach on something that is a very difficult text. And sometimes in sermon series, you might avoid those.
Right. Or I think with sermon series, we'll do like the same passage 2 times a year. When sometimes stuff needs to totally be preached twice a year. But I had one pastor one time who was like, well, let's take the lectionary and make sermon series out of it. And I was like, listen, I'm going to double our work, but that's a lot of work. And it never happened. So if somebody out there wants to take the whole lectionary and create sermon series out of it, that'd be a great project.
That would be a pretty cool yeah.
So anyway, so Second John is not in the Revised Common Lectionary, and I think we'll see why here in a bit. It's a really challenging letter. So we haven't done a letter yet. No, that's not true. The first one was a letter. But going back to our days of Philippians. I have no brain today, so this will go really well. I'm gonna let y'all answer the questions. So back to the way in which, and we've kind of talked about how interpreting different styles of biblical literature is really important. You cannot read Ruth the same way you read Micah. You will find yourself in half a disaster if you do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the same way we read Mark. And so back to how we read Philippians, this is a letter that is written to a community at a certain time with certain things going on that we don't know a whole lot about.
Yes.
So it'd be kind of like if somebody took a letter that I write to Sandy hundreds of years from now and tried to guess what's going on at Creekwood and Rockwall. And you can get a glimpse, but
because we might reference mask and they'll be like, oh, we know this is 2020.
Yeah.
Right. Oh gosh. Like, how's your live stream going? Oh gosh. But doing that, right, we only get a piece of the pie here. And Second John, with the piece of pie that it gives us, is really challenging and really difficult. And if Second John is the only piece of scripture we had, I'm not sure the Christian faith would look the way it does.
Mm-hmm.
We'll kind of get to that here in a second. And I found myself really challenged. So Sandy and David, you probably noticed there's not as many questions today as normal. One, because it's short. But 2, I really want to take the time to dissect this middle section today. because a lot of them are like the cross-stitch Bible picking verses, but I don't know how often we sit with the whole context of 2 John and look through it. So that's going to be kind of how we dive in. It's only 13 verses. One of my favorite commentaries that I read this week definitely called this the ugly stepchild of biblical interpretation. So we're
sweet.
taking on, isn't that awesome? So we're taking on something I think that I don't think we've preached it at Creekwood in my year and a half that I've been there. I don't know if I
It
can
probably
say
hadn't been preached in 18 years at Creekwood.
Okay, cool. And
I've never heard of
lectionary. Yeah. So this will be great. I think it'll be a really good experience. We have to remember it's a letter. So there's going to be elements that are going to sound weird at first that we'll kind of explain along the way. Anything else to add as introductory piece from either of you from your findings or research?
No, I mean, the only thing I would add is the things that I saw just in terms of authorship is there's kind of like a traditional understanding that it's written by the same person as the Gospel of John, but that's not totally for sure.
Yeah.
Again, we really don't know a whole lot about it, but there are stylistic changes and theological changes in 1 John, 2 John, 3 John that are a little bit different than the Gospel of John. And I found that really interesting because the hypothesis then is that John or the other disciples like set up their own rabbinical schools almost, and they had little disciples who followed them, and they cultivated those authors, and they sounded enough like John to call it John, but really they were people who were taking John's theology and even like small changes of like one was like the light of God, the light in the gospel refers to Jesus, and in 1 John the light refers to God. And so Trinitarian, but also different enough. And it's kind of like thinking about me taking one of my mentor's sayings and using it in just a different context. So just from how the Bible is constructed interpretation thing, I think it's just really interesting to think about the oral tradition or even the schooling tradition that these authors had. We tend to think that scripture just kind of fell out of the sky. Instead of recognizing the human nuance of how it was passed down from the original stories and the original authors to us and what we have today as we're looking at it.
Yeah, and that leads to a great point too, just as a reminder that these books are historical documents. The same way you would go and read, somebody's journal entry in a museum. These things happen in a certain place in a certain time. And a lot of our questions tonight are very contextual, so there are going to be a lot of the life application questions. But just sometimes the danger in interpretation, I think, can be forgetting to acknowledge that these are historical documents. And it doesn't mean they don't have merit and wonderful things for us to learn. They are primarily historical documents, and that's something just to keep in mind as we get into some of the yucky stuff in the middle of this book. So, okay, well, we will start. So we're going to start with verses 1 through 3, kind of the little greeting section. And just a reminder for everyone at home, I'm reading from the NRSV, which is what we use in worship and what I use personally. But if you're reading from a different version and something is phrased interestingly, Kathy Bradford, I know she's done a great job of throwing in when it's phrased differently in her interpretation. So feel free to throw that in the comments, and we'll make sure we kind of acknowledge and talk through some of the differences and the nuances of that. It's great to see how different translations, especially of the English, can lead us in different ways. And so follow along with us, be sure and comment. A lot of the questions are contextual and reflective tonight. So I would really love for everybody watching at home, and even if you're watching later, we come back and we check the comments throughout the week. So feel free to throw in your 2 cents on things, especially if you disagree with us. We're perfectly fine being challenged and have no problem with that, especially as we get into some of this headier things that come later. Hi, and my dog's going to be annoying probably. So I'm really sorry. I don't know what her deal is today. So this is 2 John verses 1 through 3. It says, the elders, the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father, Son, in truth and love. Now, I'm just saying, we could start our emails a little bit nicer. We could follow the example that the Bible has laid out for us, and, you know, at least start with some greeting for some things when we're going to send emails, people.
Should this be the format for every Facebook political comment or reply to a political comment? Is like
grace, mercy, and peace.
Mercy and peace.
Grace, mercy, and peace. You're an idiot. You know.
Grace, mercy, and peace. Here's what you did wrong, which is actually what John's about to do. So this is, and again, in letters, this is super common. Letters written by Paul, letters written by John, letters written by, we don't know who the heck did it. So just a couple of like verbiage, weird word things. So the elder is the sender of the letter, and it says to the elect lady and her children. So when I first read it, I thought, oh man, we've got a church led by a woman. How great is that? That's not the case. Typically, a woman is a personification of the church. So similar to like a ship, you call a ship she. This, in that context, was the church was often called the elect lady. Interestingly enough, though, I found out Greek has no way of distinguishing proper nouns because there's no capitalization in Greek. So there are some, and it's like a very small percentage of biblical scholars who are like, well, it could be like a woman and her children, but it's definitely almost 100% most likely a church community, and it's disciples or followers or kind of whatever word you'd like to use in there. But for my Bible nerds out there, when the word love appears in verse 3, this is one of the instances in the New Testament we see the Greek word agape, which is this really holistic, what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody help me out. Phone a friend. Somebody help me out with agape love.
Unmerited, unbounding.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Unconditional. Yeah. All the uns. Yeah. Love that doesn't end. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the version of love that's used here in this letter. And so I was thinking about what we're seeing even just in this greeting, and we're about to get into what's not going well here. I think sometimes we think of faith as like a really individual thing that happens, particularly for us in Western Christianity. We talk about our personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and we talk to people about their discipleship pathway personally. But in this, the whole letter is written to the church and its followers, right? And this binding force that brings them together is this agape love, is this kind of unbounding force almost. I'm getting real Star Wars real fast. Brings everyone together, right? And so I just wanted to kind of take the metaphor from the church being family here and ask you, where have you seen the church as a family? And I mean that in the ways in which sometimes we have great days with our family that are super awesome, and sometimes we're not. So either like in personal life or in ministry, kind of feel free to take that question wherever you want to. And I am going to take care of my dog for just a second, but I can still hear you.
Go for it.
I could go.
Yeah, go for it.
There was this one time I was leading a Bible study on the book of Luke, and as we were going through it midway through, somebody in our class, about 20 or so people, she asked, do you think it's really, really possible for healing to happen today? And you could tell it was a very personal question she asked. And we answered yes. And we were talking to her, and she said, because my hands have such horrible, she's in her early 30s. She goes, I have such horrible arthritis in my hands, and I can hardly zip up my baby's onesie. And she just started losing it and crying. And the entire group around the table came over to her, and they said, can we pray on her? Can we hug on her? And this one lady who's in her 80s said, oh, girl, let me tell you what you should try. And she started listing off all these different things that help her with her arthritis. And then she pulled out a tube out of her purse and she goes, here, honey, you can have it. Take this. This will help. And then they all started adding they swarmed her with love. And I just sat back and watched it happen. You know, I was only there to help create that space for it, to watch the church totally in action. And by the end of it, 15 minutes later, she's drying her tears. There's a lot of laughter. There's joking and phone numbers being exchanged, because for the most part, this was an eclectic group of people who didn't know each other very well. And one of them said, oh, Sandy, we're so sorry about the Bible study. Are you kidding? This is the church in action. This is what this is about. No big deal. That was one of my favorite times, to just watch the church in action. It was that agape love. It was unquestioning, no judgment. No judgment given. It was really good.
Yeah, I had a similar experience of eclecticism, or an eclectic group, when I led a introduction to the Old Testament study over at Stonebridge. It was about a 6-week study, I guess, and I didn't know who would sign up, but I had about 2 groups or 2 couples that were the stalwarts of the church, grew up in the church, could answer all the Sunday school questions, and had these very firm convictions. And then I had couple that were in the middle of, like, we've gone to church for a long time, but we've never actually picked up the Bible. And then there was like 6 people who just either hadn't darkened the door of a church before, or like actually actively left church at one point because they hated it, or they were offended by something that happened in their home church or their church growing up. And so it was this really interesting group. And of course, the first thing we talk about is evolution versus creation. And it was this real interesting dynamic where we pushed each other, and I started seeing between that, or then we go into Exodus and we're talking about law and grace and sin and all, and so just different camps of people with kind of sensitive subjects, one opening up with each other in debate and arguing in a study, but then I'd see them in worship sitting next to each other the next Sunday, or at least getting a donut together and saying hi. And so to me, it was kind of that there's such a stereotype, and I probably have seen it more in the last couple of years, at least in my ministry context, of people getting upset and just picking up their toys and leaving and going to some place that they agree with. But at that point, it was the beauty of the church of we don't agree on this, and yet we love each other through that. And so we're going to stay at the table, and we're going to stay in the book, and we're going to stay in the worship, and we're going to come hell or high water, we're going to stick together in Christian love. And so that's been a cool thing. And I've grew when you typed out the question and I got it, the first thing I thought about was all of these like adult mentors I had at church. And in my mind, when I was a kid, or even in high school, was that all of these people were exactly the same people. I thought they all kind of had the same characteristics. We were all from the same city. We all rooted for the Allen Eagles. It was just this very homogenous group. And the more that I have grown up and seen these people's Facebook stuff and talked with them more intimately as an adult, the more I realized that there should not be any reason whatsoever that any of these people were in the same ministry setting. And yet they were, and it was the best experience for somebody like me, because they were all about agape love as opposed to their own personal agenda, per se. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, when you mentioned growing up, that's what I had thought when I came up with the question originally. So growing up, I had 3 women who were my children's directors at our church, and they were all 3 part-time. They were all 3 like super best friends, and it was kind of just like the holy trinity of awesome children's pastors. And they all had kids that were the same age, and they would lead children's time, and they would dress up as the wackiest Bible characters for us. And we had like the Bible zone, which was like the stage where you went, and these women, like, I know the VBS has gotten a little out of hand in modern times. Nothing holds a candle, I think, to what Shanna, Sherry, and Chris were able to pull off growing up. Like, one theme was underwater, and I swear it was magical. It was like going underwater. But recently, Sherry, one of these women, passed away. She had just some complications from the surgery, and they were actually attending First UMC Richardson here in town. They had all moved away from Odessa, and I just have been really reflecting on these three women and their impact on me, and just in a season of the great pause is kind of what I'm now calling the pandemic, and so we're all reflecting a little more. And obviously, with Sherry's passing, that's come up even more, and that's where the church was a family. I met up with the daughter of Chris, so one of the three women, and she said, Sherry I never had to worry about what would happen if something happened to my parents, because I knew that Shanna and Sherry had me covered, right? That was how that worked. And so I think the church is its best when it's a family, when we expand that definition to beyond just our nuclear family. One of my greatest joys in ministry is seeing inclusion on fairly radical levels. So back when we're in person, like there's an entire row of women that sit right behind me and David in our service, and they lovingly call themselves the Widow's Row. And it's women who've lost their spouses in the last couple of years. And I think about just the ways in which, as a single unmarried person, I'm led into the lives of other people. I think that's where church as a family is really at its best. And when we expand the definition of family, David, like you said, to literally having nothing in common with people, where there's no reason why these people should be friends, and yet there is, right? It's grace, mercy, and peace from God through Jesus Christ, like this opening says.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else to add from the opening piece before we get to the good stuff?
No.
No, let's go into the drama. That's what everybody's here for anyway.
Yeah. Who's
enough
here
of the
for
grace, mercy, and peace.
It be a controversy, deceivers.
It is nice to
doers.
have a moment to talk about the great parts of church, though. I feel like you kind of there are so many moments each day in which people do want the drama, and they want to know about oh, did you hear about this scandal, or did you hear about what the Pope did, or did you hear about what's going on with the Methodist Church, or even a conflict in their own setting. And so it really is nice to just sit back and be yes, there is a row of women who have adopted each other as family because they've lost their immediate family, and it's just what the church is about. And so it's just nice to take moments and reflect on just how great the church is and can certainly be.
Yeah, at its best. And when we work for it to be at its best, and I'm not talking pastors, I'm talking the church works for the church to be at the best. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And maybe that can be inspiring to us in the coming days and weeks to push for the Widow's Row way of doing church. Maybe that'll become a proper noun, even though we have capital letters in English, it'll be okay. So we'll just read 4 through 11, and then we're going to go through this really slow. So let's just read it all, get this drama, and then break it down. So this is verse 4. And I love this. I was overjoyed to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we have been commanded by the Father. But now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing to you a new commandment, but one that we have had from the beginning. Let us love one another. All right, John, or whoever's writing this, waste no time getting down to almost snarky is how I read this. Let me remind you that loving people's not new.
Can I also say that John kind of writes like Jane Austen is let me tell you, dear lady, was coming on here.
That's great. This is verse 6. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is a deceiver and the Antichrist. Be on your guard so that you do not lose what we have worked for, but may receive a full reward. Everyone who does not abide in the teaching of Christ, but goes beyond it, does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. Do not receive into the house or welcome anyone who welcomes you and does not bring this teaching. For to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Oof.
Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yes. So let's just go slow. Let's just break it down. So I really do. I love verse 4. I love this like joyous affirmation. David, please don't do my performance review like this ever. But it's like it's good to hear that like some of you have been doing well. But let me remind you of this.
Right.
Like, Keri, Lynn, it's fine that like you like show up to work, but you've done a terrible job. Like that's not ideal, right? Not the way. I'm assuming, Sandy, with the HR perspective, this is not the proper way to sensitively deliver the news here.
It does kind of remind me, there are some managers who will do kind of this Oreo cookie kind of approaches that they describe. They're like, here's the good, and here's the bad, and then here's the good again. And then sometimes people will walk out going, wait, was I chastised or was I offended? I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I've heard that called the kiss, kick, kiss approach.
Yep.
See, this to me was more like a slam dunk. It was like, you're doing so great. Just kidding, you're horrible. There's no cookie here on the other side. Except at the end, he's gonna be like, "See you later."
Yeah.
So it's more of just like a moment. So let's go to verse 5. It's mean, but it's interesting, right? So the writer, and we'll just say John for our just easy to spit it out ness of the rest of the evening, but there's this almost snarky way of reminding people that loving as a commandment is not new, and that's one thing that I, as your friendly neighborhood Old Testament lover, I say this all the time, like the commandment to love God and love your neighbor was not new with Jesus. Jesus was reciting what Deuteronomy said over and over and over again, and so part of me reads it as snarky. Part of me reads it as this fulfillment of what happened in the Old Testament law that came to be fulfilled in Christ. Like it brings the whole pie together here. So I kind of have this like twofold understanding. So verse 5, I think, is this kind of potential proof that everything's not well in the community. Like I don't think there would be this way of phrasing to John, let me remind you to love everyone if they were doing it. Like it's not a good job.
Especially since like he addresses that he doesn't really have time to write them right now.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to fire off this little hand slap because it's really that important.
This is the biblical version of not a subtweet, because it's a direct message, but it's short enough. It's not like Romans with all this like theology unpacked in it, right? So one thing I kind of thought about with verse 5 is it's not only a callback to the law, but I wonder if for this community, it's maybe a callback to their faith journey. What we're taught from the very beginning, right? I was thinking about Sherry. What do we teach our children, right? We teach our children theological concepts, but we start with loving people, and we tell our kids when they're little, don't do that, don't hit, that's not a nice thing to do, don't take that from them, that's not a nice thing to do. And I think even non-Christian parents, right, we teach our kids moral right and wrong to begin with, loving people and not loving people. So one thing I wanted to kind of ask, what is an early experience in your faith journey that you can think back to when times are difficult or cloudy, or I don't know if seminary was as hard for y'all as it was for me, but there were certainly early stories in my faith journey I had to go back to continue through seminary. What do y'all think?
Yeah, so I was confused by the question. I should have clarified earlier. Are you asking about when times are hard, what are early stories we anchor in, or are you asking about early stories that were tough?
I think anchor in. I think anchor in.
Okay.
Yeah. Like what's a
good
thing you think about? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're keeping it in the good stuff for as long as we can here, David.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, really, there's more than a million to choose from, just because I was one of those lucky people that had a positive church experience growing up. And so the number of VBS moments, I mean, I distinctly remember the wonderment of going on my first mission trip, and it was to Alpine, Texas, and like we served at the Wesley Foundation at Sul Ross State, but it was like the amazingness of being out of my bubble doing something else and how great that felt, and then being able to wonder at the stars at McDonald's Observatory, and so you've got like the hands and feet of Jesus, and you've got the awe of God all wrapped up into one, combined with moments at Bridgeport camp that are just this palpable of like, what does the world look like when you don't have any care in the world except to love each other. So those are moments I fall back on. But the really interesting one that I think I've shared with people before, but like after having this incredibly in-depth church experience growing up, I went to college and I kind of realized that I didn't really have a faith. I think a lot of people experience this. Like I had a church and I had religion and I believed, but I didn't have like this really personal experience. And it probably took 3 years and a change of major. I went through biology and kinesiology, and then when I became a religion major, and I was really struggling not with the theological the scholarly concepts of religion. I was struggling with the idea of Christianity itself as a, do I have to believe this one thing? And there was a time when our professor just took us outside one time around this fountain, and it was simply introducing concepts of exclusivism, inclusivism, and nihilism. And for whatever reason, the idea that there was this inclusive understanding of, okay, well, maybe there is a right version, but everything else leans close and we can include those people, was like the first time that anybody had ever told me that. And like, I would say it was a Aldersgate experience for me, of my heart being strangely warmed, of everything I had experienced of God was inclusion, and it was love, and it was mercy. And all of a sudden now we were putting words and language to that. And it took a major in college for someone to finally do that, like with real good language. So I hold on to that one because I can talk myself in circles out of things if I'm really in that mood. But that was one time in which the scholarly approach actually led me to a deeper existential spiritual experience that was something that, I just can't explain outside of God.
I can recall a time in high school. My parents had gotten divorced. I had been raised in the Catholic Church, and we were no longer Catholic, no longer going to church. And I was very away from God and very angry with God for a lot of things. But in the Catholic faith, at least from me and my perspective, we didn't have Bibles. We had these things in the pewbacks called missals, and they had a little section of scripture, and you just went through that each week. And a friend in my sophomore year of high school introduced me to his youth group, and each kid walked in with this Bible every time they went into youth group. I'm like, I don't have one of those. And I remember asking my mom, I said, I want to go buy a Bible. And she blew me off and said, I don't really know why you want to have anything to do with that religion stuff. But I was so drawn into this youth group because they were so encouraging. And I got some money. I saved up some money, and I went to a Mardell or something like that, and I bought my own Bible, and I started reading it, and I started to pray to God directly. And it wasn't the prayers that I was taught as a Catholic. It wasn't the rote kind of things. I just started to have a conversation, and my faith really deepened my sophomore year of high school. And it felt like it was kind of like what you're saying, David, and that it was like, wow, this isn't my parents' faith. It's not something that is just passed down by tradition, but this is something I can really connect with and get to know who God is. And there were a lot of revelations in that year about God's love, and I just didn't quite get that message in the church that I was a part of as a Catholic growing up. And it was so refreshing. It was so grace-filled. It was just so different that I remind myself when I have down times that, it comes back down to knowing that God is love, and that we are called to love one another. We are called to love God. And, fundamentally that's what it is to be curious, to dig a little deeper, and to go back to scripture and go back to prayer. That's how I know I grew so deeply in my faith. And sometimes when I start to feel a little apart from God, I know that I will I will be drawn back into that relationship more strongly when I dig back into scripture and pray.
And I think so I was just saying, similar to, so your experience, my experience, I think John's writing here is most people don't join things or get involved in things completely out of fear or hatred. I think they find like a belonging and an acceptance and inclusion and a love that starts it off. It's just when that ownership gets threatened, then all of a sudden they start creating these kind of legalese and exclusivism, and it becomes this painful routine as opposed to the first joy moment when we fear of losing it. And so I think the question so brilliant to ask is the anchor moments you have of, it's kind of, I when I do marriage counseling, the first question I always ask is, well, why'd you get married in the first place? And they have to go back and recall, like, okay, we did walk down the aisle to the altar, and there was some reason behind this, and 99.9% of the time it was because we wanted to.
Yeah.
And so I think it really is great when we're in places of, trying to figure out all the legalese of it all, just to realize that at one point we just wanted this.
Yeah.
Sandy, do you still have that Bible?
I do.
Nice.
Yeah, I totally do.
That's awesome.
It's somewhere on this bookshelf.
I believe you.
Along with 10 others.
Classic pastor move. Okay, those are great. So let's get into some headier stuff. And the reason I wanted to start with those anchor moments is kind of for what's to come. I was on a different Bible study this morning. It's just a weird day. And we talked a lot about how the things that our faith shapes and evolves, right? I like to think about our relationship with God is like a dance, right? And God's leading, but it's this constant moving. And sometimes there are changes made to the assumptions of our faith that are really uncomfortable. And the three of us have certainly had those experiences. But to lead people through those experiences are really difficult. And so those anchor moments, particularly in just a season, I think that feels really divisive right now, are ones that I hope everybody watching can have your own and go back to. And maybe COVID is going to become an anchor experience, right? Like I made it through 2020 and still believed in God at the end of it. Like that may be an anchor moment 50 years from now. But particularly let's name it, like with the election season we have in front of us the next couple of weeks. I really wanted to ask that question to give us the space to take a breath and remember, why are you part of a faith community in the first place? Like David kind of says with the marriage counseling question. So we're going to move on to verse 7. We're just going to read 7 by its. Oh, I've already read this, but 7 by itself. So many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is a deceiver and the Antichrist. So strong language about the Antichrist aside. Why? And this is great Board of Ordained Ministry preparation for Sandy. Why is it important to affirm Jesus's humanity? Why is John taking it so seriously here? And if you want to talk about contextual and what we know about what was going on at the time, feel free. But why is it important for us or anyone to affirm that Jesus was human?
Go for it, Sandy. I'm taking notes for next year's interview.
Poor Sandy.
Yeah, I think of Jesus was the very embodiment, walking on this earth is the very embodiment of God's love. And to be fully human, fully divine, to show love and exhibit love to others. I mean, what an amazing example for them in starting a church and showing exactly how to be the fulfillment of what God asks you to do in Deuteronomy. And so when they're saying that didn't happen, and I mean, I see that there's so many other ways that they could say that that the deceivers and some of the things that the people will do to pull people away from what that love looks like in action. It could be easy to be pulled away And so I see that that's kind of where in number 8, he's starting to say, like, be on your guard. Gosh, it's so easy to slip into the idea that maybe this isn't real. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe this is all just, it's fiction, and life is really hard, and it's easier to do something different. It's easier to talk bad about people. It's easier to be toxic and to gossip. It's hard to love. It really is hard to love.
Yeah, and I think that's why it is important that Christ came in Jesus. And right, I'm making the distinction that John kind of makes of Jesus is the person and Christ is the spirit that meshes together in one mysterious homoousios kind of combination. And I think it is so important in that we get to, for one, see the example of what, like, if God chose to live life, this is how God would choose to live life. So we have kind of a moral exemplar there. I think about what Paul says in terms of, well, Jesus is the second Adam, and we're getting a little bit into substitutionary atonement, which I'm not totally the biggest fan of, but in terms of if sin's entered the world this way, then it has to exit the world this way. I think part of it is along with the moral exemplar or Christus Victor theories of atonement, like, I think there's a certain amount in which we need to see that God knows our pain in order to trust God with our pain and with our sin. And it's so what'd you say?
Yeah, has walked in his footsteps.
Yeah, I think, like, every Good Friday service, it just strikes me over and over again that it wasn't like some simple, clean thing, but how messy and painful. And I actually I don't totally enjoy Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, but I remember the time I watched it being so deeply moved because Christ was in flesh. And the willingness, right? So it's not like this has to happen, but the choice for this to happen, and the choice, not even just for the death part, but the choice for the life part, and what everything was chosen. So I think it's incredibly important from a, I would say, overall salvation standpoint, that when it is so hard, so easy to fall away, we have almost this Christ in flesh as an anchor to look at, to identify with, and recognize, okay, well, if that's the epitome of what humanity is supposed to be, then okay, at least I've got a standard of grace to live up to see in action.
One of the things I've always said in my and so it's no secret that I worked in youth ministry a little bit, and I'm just not very good at working with teenagers. Like, if I ever have children, when they're teenagers, they're going to go live with Aunt Katrina for 6 years because I don't know what to do with teenagers. And that's where, like, man, I wish we had a record of Jesus as a teenager, so I could at least, like, with my teenagers, be like, even when he was hormonal, he was nicer than you. I don't know, Sandy, as a mom of teenagers, if that's relatable.
Oh my gosh, I have a shameless plug.
That is the best book ever. That is my favorite book.
She just pulls it out of the bookshelf. I love it. Wait, can you talk?
Not recommend that highly. I cannot recommend that highly enough. That is the greatest book.
What's the title called? We did book recommendations last week. Oh my gosh, is it really?
It's called Lamb. And Kyler wanted to know what the title of the book was.
Yeah, Lamb.
I don't know if she'll be reading this one anytime soon, though.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
There is some bad language in there occasionally, but it's the gospel according to Biff, Jesus's childhood teenage friend, and they get into a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to loan you this book, Keri Lynn, because it is it is fantastic, and it's actually really devotionally sound toward the end.
So
sorry, I derailed a little bit.
So I wish I had $1 million. Sandy, can you pull that out of your bookshelf?
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to derail you, but you're like, I wish we knew what Jesus was like as a teenager. This is a good job of trying to.
Getting derailed is like part of this. It may be derailing before it's Bible study. So that do not apologize at all. That's last week I had Blair Thompson White, Sandy, and between the two of us, we probably recommended 20 books. So no derailing whatsoever. It's totally fine and awesome.
I love that you could have gone like the Anne Rice Out of Egypt, a really dramatic, serious one, but you pulled out Christopher Moore's Lamb.
She did. She just pulled it out of nowhere, like you had it ready. That was amazing.
Just
like a
looked over.
magic trick. I love it.
I was going to make another point just for everyone watching. Well, no, because the other thing about Jesus being like, because this is not the only heresy, right? There's a million, like, I think when we tend to get discouraged when we don't understand the Trinity very well, and recognizing that like the people who are calling Jesus Lord didn't understand the Trinity very well, and they were all fighting about it and killing each other over these things. So welcome to the club, everyone who doesn't understand why this and how this works. But
you cannot kill people you don't understand things with.
Do not kill people. Yes, that goes against the whole agape love thing earlier.
Disclaimer that pops up on the bottom.
Right. Yeah, we'll put that in the comment section, and there you go. But one of the other reasons I think it's important is like, so if Christ is not with Jesus, right? If it's not this fully combined, mysterious God-man combination, then the resurrection doesn't matter,
right?
Or it's not God, Jesus defeating death. It's God pulling some person back to life, as opposed to conquering death, God's self, out of this. So I think that there has to be that that union in order for the resurrection to really mean anything, and so that we can like claim that power and that strength of that death doesn't have a sting anymore, even though it does. But like death doesn't have the final word, and that doesn't matter if Christ isn't one with Jesus.
Yeah, David, I'm glad you just mentioned that. This might be a derailing, but just earlier today, I was sitting with a couple, and his wife is slowly dying, Alzheimer's, and it's been 8 months of just basically watching her wither away. And her husband's pretty much confined to her bedside, and she's really not very coherent or anything. And I was talking to him, visiting a little bit today, and he just said, I have absolutely no hope. There's no hope whatsoever. And as we were talking about it, I just asked, could you open your heart to see hope after her physical body's gone? Can you find hope in the resurrection? And you're right. So to that point, and we went on and had this conversation in prayer, but David, to your point, it's like in that kind of moment when it is like the ultimate suffering here on earth, that has to be some hope. That has to be what sustains you. And that resurrection means something.
Yeah, I mean, it's what gives me hope. So that's why I speak about it. But I was wrestling, like I had the same question that Keri Lynn. I was like, why does this matter? And why would John tell you not to invite this in? Because we're supposed to be welcoming and everything. And so I was trying to figure out why is it so important. Well, it kind of derails the hope aspect of it all. And if you start infusing these, kind of ideas, even of just, hey, there's a good teacher who has great morality, that only lasts so long.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in terms of what you can offer for hope. So, and
there's nothing to promise, I guess. And we don't do what we do because we're going to get anything. But I do think like funerals would be really, really a lot harder if we didn't have hope that there was a perfect pain-free life after death. Right. Like, I don't know if I could, I certainly wouldn't be a pastor if it was just, hey, there's this guy, Jesus, he was human, be like him. Like, I don't know if we would follow that.
Yeah. It's definitely the combination.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, because I've often said that heaven's not the most important thing for me, which is a really bizarre statement for me to make. But
yeah,
I think the resurrection gives credence to Jesus as a teacher, and it instills a lot more power in what he's saying. But like for the funeral example, it's real easy when, so we did John White's funeral today, and John was like the epitome of the great church guy. Like, he was awesome. And it's really easy to talk about. But I'm thinking about the, teenage girl I did a funeral for who committed suicide and really wasn't that, would not be classically that great of a person. But there's grace and hope there because of the power of resurrection, right? It's not like a final judging ground. It's not that your life is over. It's that God has defeated sin and death, and so therefore we get to have that chance of meeting Jesus even after death. And I think you take that away from people, and it just becomes pretty depressing.
Yeah.
When I think to David, to your point, and now we're just getting really nerdy, but like one of the things I wrote in my commissioning paperwork that I don't know if I truly acknowledged since I wrote it down was my definition of resurrection is not just what happens to us after we die, but what is a pastor and as a leader, like I get to watch happen with folks who are struggling with addiction and find recovery. That's resurrection. Or families who are experiencing a tough time and they're experiencing some kind of division and they just find a way to have Thanksgiving together. That's resurrection. And so I think to this Jesus Christ coming in the flesh, this resurrection that we see of this life after death is not just something that we sit around and wait to die to experience, but we experience it. You know, it fits a lot with our baptismal theology. Wendy did a great prayer during the funeral today where she said that John's covenant of his baptism was complete upon his passing. And I had never thought of that way before.
Wow.
Wendy came in guns a-blazing with that beautiful prayer. It was really great today. But that was something that caused me to kind of think, oh my gosh, yeah, like, so this idea of resurrection, like, I don't know, there's been, and maybe this is oh, here we go. All right, here I go. I'm calling an audible. I'm throwing in a question I didn't send in advance.
There we go.
And I really, really, really want people who are watching to throw this in the comments, but I want to ask, because we talked about this in a meeting last night, where have you experienced resurrection even in 2020? So if it happened in 2019, it doesn't count, people. But like, what's been like the bright spot, the resurrection, like where have you experienced it in 2020?
There's lots of things, but there are other people's stories, and I'm trying to decide like whose story I have the permission to tell. Yeah. So I'm not totally comfortable sharing these specific stories right now. I just just in general, people whose, people I've seen rebound over just the worst start of the year, even before COVID. That could happen to the worst start of the year and having to work through grief and pain and loss and even a sense of purpose and place and community, and still processing, but coming, I can see the joy and the struggle leading to an even stronger person in that. And so I find that to be the story of resurrection that happens over time, and seeing this person recognize their own blessedness and giftedness, even when everything is not great, has been pretty amazing. And then another person who's just had, oh my gosh, just thing after thing after thing after thing after thing happen, some of them on top of each other, none of them having to do with the pandemic, but the pandemic surrounding it all, just as one more thing. And seeing that person look at their new gift that they have as though nothing is wrong in the world and God is so good, is pretty inspiring to watch. So it's I've seen a couple different things like that.
What I have noticed, and it's not just been in my family, but in some of our friends and some people in the congregation, is that we were a very overtaxed family, overscheduled family with 2 teenagers and involved in a lot of activities. And when
so many things.
When those came to a screeching halt, initially there's some grief from it and a little like, well, what do we do with all this free time? It's so weird. But I think that as a family, and probably other families too, we had a resurrection and rebirth moment during the pandemic, and that we were able to bond together in so many impromptu ways, when Saturdays used to be reserved for, a cross-country meet for hours, or a track meet, or a band contest, and apart from each other. But I have so many memories in the last 6 months of us all just hanging out in the hammock outside, or on some chairs outside. And I don't even remember how we got there, but there was nothing rushing us to end that time. And so we would spend hours just having conversation and checking in on each other. And so as we are starting to put things back into our schedules, we're being more intentional about how do we keep that family time together? How do we hold on to those moments that make us laugh and make sure that we don't take them for granted anymore, and not hold life so tightly and so seriously. I think that has been incredibly helpful to, impromptu Nerf gun wars. Why not? Hide and go seek in the dark. Let's do it.
We had impromptu water gun wars in the backyard, led by my 11-year-old. So that was, we had similar experiences. Josh Fitzpatrick is an associate at First Richardson, and he did a really good Facebook video one time about here are the 5 things that we should not let go of once the pandemic is over. And he talked about similar themes of, we had a death, and we ended up finding some really great things when, our busy schedule died. And even the people who are like, well, we might as well start baking bread, keep baking bread and finding these joys that they had and not letting those go. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we did lots of family projects around the house. I de-wallpapered my bathroom and textured the walls and painted. And
oh, that's a lot.
And then the kids.
You were one of those people in quarantine. So my aunt and uncle.
We built a bench out of cinder blocks and wood, and painted and stained and turned on this loud music outside in the yard. It was so much fun.
So I think the people, truthfully, the people I've seen kind of win the DIY of the pandemic would be my Uncle Carl and my Aunt Wendy. So they cleaned out, on week 1, they did all the closets. And I was like, what are y'all doing? That's like a week 7 move. They did the whole attic in week 7. And then over the course of July, they flipped their pop-up from 1992, and they made the inside Chip and Joanna Gaines have come on the inside of that RV. All the meanwhile still having great family time. We watched Speed together one day for fun.
Wow.
It just is. I think where I've seen resurrection has been in some of those in-person moments. But I think for me, in particular, being somebody who now lives alone, the number of people that have, and some of our church members too, who've called to check on me, and even some of my long distance friendships that have been better attended to in COVID time than in normal time, because there is time to attend to our long distance. Yes, and Rosie, you are resurrection in 2022. She can feel that I'm not talking about her. But I think those have been really redeeming factors of the year. So, Katie, I appreciate the comment you have about going through your papa's death and getting to kind of experience grief in the pause is weird and hard and honestly not fair. But I'm glad that you've experienced some resurrection in that as well. So let's talk about verses 8 and 9. And this is where 2 John just gets really, really, really tough. Not that it wasn't already tough, but I kind of want to put a question in front of us. So, and feel free to take this and be as, if you want to talk theological, maybe let's not name names or tag people. But as pastors and as theologically trained folks, and really and I'm not just saying this because y'all are here, but David and Sandy, you're probably 2 of the most well-read people that I know as well. You're probably 2 of the smartest people that I get to hang out with. I'm kind of amazed y'all want to be my friend or work with me. But what would you consider to be the markings of a false teacher? In modern times, I don't think we have a whole lot of people running around saying Jesus wasn't human. So I would say it's a little bit harder now. And I would add to what I've seen a lot of from everyone is now everyone's church is accessible online, right? Including ones with some theological pitfalls. And so I think maybe with some theological concepts, let's answer this question really specifically and offer some tools to people. And what are we supposed to do as a follow-up question? What are we supposed to do with these instructions that John gives us to do with false teachers? Because It doesn't seem very nice, first of all. Like, I think a child would tell you that's not very nice. But what does that mean for us kind of in modern times, in all of this? So I'm going to throw that to the both of you.
I think of someone who's probably like a false prophet would be somebody who's going to really lean heavily on idols and help you get distracted from the good news of God. The things that can destroy our inner harmony with the Holy Spirit, our inner harmony with God, things that I think when I think about those as actions, I feel like they typically take the form of hate. It could also take the form of lukewarm faith. For example, if I hear someone, you know what, I'm not really going to go back to church because what's the point of church? We really don't really need church. And I think that could lead us down a dangerous path of some lukewarm faith, because the whole point of it is to do this all in community. We are the church as a body. And I think when people are really cold-hearted and unloving, those kind of toxic, they can, I guess one of the tests would be, am I speaking truth and in such a way that it hardens someone's heart or turns them away from somebody else just so that they'll agree with me? So I think of some toxic people who are, just, harmonious. And if someone accepts my teachings, will they become a less loving person? So I really love when you get in Galatians 5 of like the fruit of authentic love, authentic gospel is that joy and peace, and other stuff is like the jealousy and envy and anger and idolatry. And we can be idolatrous people. We could really lean that way. So when it comes to being online stuff, when you're searching for, I guess ask questions about what, you're listening to certain preachers, listening to certain narratives about what Christianity is really all about. Think through, is their message excluding someone? Is it speaking harm? Is it speaking out of anger and hate? Is it out of alienation? Then I think that that's disingenuous. I think that that's going to set you up for being out of harmony with God. I think that you've got to just pay attention to where you're getting your theology. I have a bias. I love the Methodist theology. So, when you're thinking, what is forgiveness all about? Maybe when you type in Google forgiveness, you also type in UMC, and to kind of go that direction a bit more, because there is some really crazy stuff out there. I heard somebody recently say that they can't seem to get well because they have unforgiveness in their heart. And I'm like, where did you get that idea? And it was a sermon they heard recently during COVID from some other pastor that had been passed around to them. Mm-hmm. So thinking through that theology a bit more and thinking, okay, is it going to create love? Is it going to create joy and gentleness, faithfulness and peace? Or is it going to create anger and envy and jealousy and pull you away?
That's great.
Yeah, I like the Galatians that you pulled in there, because I was thinking it's what's the object of adoration and what's the target of love is a great testing ground. And when I think of when you were saying the example, kind of the Pentecostal example is what I'm guessing of, I can't get well because I have unforgiveness in my heart. And it's the same line of, well, my prayers don't get heard if I have sin in my life or unrepented sin in my life. And which is really just a form of the prosperity gospel of, if I'm faithful enough, good things will happen. And then it's this rabbit hole of, well, if good things don't happen, then I must not be faithful enough. So I need to give more, pray more, and it becomes this worked righteousness kind of element. So I think when that is the faith or the theology that you're being handed, the object of adoration is yourself. You're not worshiping God, you're worshiping my health, wealth, and happiness. So therefore the target of my love is also myself. And if I'm the only thing that matters in love, then I'm going to hurt a lot of people to make myself happy. And I think it swings the other way with kind of the legalism of the idolatry of the law or the love of self, so much so that I want to create laws to keep other people out of God's presence fully. So those are if I were to tell people, I always like to kind of try and tell people, like, trying to understand what the experience of the teacher is. Digging a little bit, like, where they're coming from. Like, I can fully claim, like, my Enneagram 3 number is one of conquest and winning, and wanting to shine. And so if knowing that about me helps to understand why I preach so much about humility, is there's a little bit of like a self message going on to myself. And so trying to understand, like, what's the background of whoever's preaching, the woman or the man who's doing it, to understand a little bit more of what their motivations are and what they may be saying about God because of their own experience as well. But I totally agree with you about we can be really idolatrous in there.
I think one of the most self-catching questions I've developed this year to ask myself with just interactions with people, like whether it be conflict or not, or emails or Facebook comments, I've started asking myself what's not being said. So when somebody comes in and like, and this is just pretend, but like accuses me of something, I want, and I'm working on, for my first reaction to be, well, what's not being said? And what's not being said is, my partner is sick and I don't know what to do. Or I have no money and I don't know how to make it through the rest of the pandemic. Like, sometimes, and we have to have the same grace for preachers. And that I say as someone who could name names of preachers I don't like right now. There are some things not being said, right, behind what's going on, and there's brokenness in all of us who are, even those of us who are commissioned and ordained to lead the church, right? And we lead from those places, and I think that's what makes us authentic, when we can say what's not being said, when we can say I'm scared, when we can say I'm grieving, when we can say I'm hurt, when we can say my family's driving me crazy, or whatever it is in between. And so I think that's another piece, to David, to add to what you're saying, with all things that we're doing, is what's not being said, particularly, for these people who were even in context claiming that Jesus wasn't human. Well, what was going on? Like, what's not being said here? Like, what's the deal? Like, a lot of my time that I'll stop in conflict is I'm like, what? Start over. Like, walk me through this. What? And usually it's something in the backstory that explains what's happening with the result of what's going on.
So it kind of deals with, I don't know if these were Gnostics necessarily who were the false teachers here, but, for definition of Gnosticism, for those who don't maybe know, is it's like the special knowledge, and it's only people who have attained the special knowledge or know the special knowledge are the real ones who are saved and who are welcomed into the community, and they're kind of better than, it's like a Da Vinci Code kind of understanding of things. And
it's a big yikes.
It's a big yikes, right? For especially when Jesus says, "I've told you everything," right? I call you friends. There's not really like a secret.
Ditch him 10 minutes
and then they
later.
ditch him. But I'm thinking about this one story, because if sometimes I think it's not even just the preachers and teachers. It's like we can just as individuals become false prophets for others based upon our own protection of ourselves.
Yeah.
And there was a woman, and there was a family that left a church that I was at, and they loved all the ministries of the church. They really were active in the ministries of the church, but we started teaching that everything happens for a reason is the worst theology that you can hold, or one of the most dangerous things you can say. And we started going into that, and she had a childhood where her father had done unspeakable things to her, just horrible things. And she had rebelled against those things and found grace in God just in spite of them. And in her mind, mentally, she only equated that she had a relationship with God that sustained her because her father's actions pushed her to those things, which is a little bit true in terms of it's sequentially true in that those things caused her to reach out to a higher power. But she can only make sense of her life if God caused those things to happen to her.
Wow.
And she left the church out of her own protection because she needed everything happens for a reason to be true. And And in doing so, it's a little bit, it's a pastoral thing of, yes, I need you to be able to live and be sane. On the other hand, making that statement true for her, I feel like is doing more damage on some level in the grand scheme of things. And if she's going to tell somebody else that, so that's where,
situations she encounters.
What?
And for other situations she encounters.
Right. Yeah. So that was one of the harder pastoral moments I've ever had, because, I've kind of have this catchphrase of sometimes it's better to be pastoral than right. And like normally I would sit there and be pastoral and just listen. And I was just so afraid that the next car accident that happened, or when her kid got sick, like she was going to just completely lose her faith eventually, because why would God keep doing all these bad things to me? And I think that's the danger in idolatry like that. Idolatry of our own version of God, as opposed to, I think what John, Paul, many others in the Bible are saying is like, look, here is the risen Christ. This is who we're looking at. And this, your idea doesn't jive with the risen Christ. And that's why I'm trying to keep you out of my house, is so that we don't do damage to people who think that God is out to get them, to teach them some sort of lesson.
Well, and you can see even about like 8 and 9, like there's so much of this warning about like be on guard and do not receive into your house. Like it kind of seems extreme in 10 of like do not receive into your house or even welcome them. Like that's pretty harsh, but it goes back to that, be on your guard, because this is easy to fall into. And to be in harmony with God it takes a daily surrender each and every day to your to the kind of tendencies that you can be inclined to, the kind of outside influences that can be speaking. You can have 10 people speaking to you this way, and then you got the really good news here, the truth, and you're like, wow, there's a lot this way. Maybe I should go and check that out. And that it just seems like he's very well aware of how easy it could be, how susceptible we are to those kind of messages that seem logical for that one particular instance, but can end up crumbling our faith.
Yeah. So I need to move us on because we're about to run out of time, and I want to get to. So I'm ending with a happy question. See, I made the Oreo out of Bible study tonight. I tried to keep it light and fluffy. It's not a double stuffed Oreo that I preached about on Sunday. I think I did an Oreo thin, which is actually Antichrist. Who is asking for less cream on their Oreos?
I was thinking we spent a lot of time in that middle. We spent a lot of time in that middle stuffing. It could be a double stuffed, right?
It could be a double stuffed. Like whoever let me. I preached about like being tempted by double stuffed Oreos in like a very in-depth, probably too long fashion on Sunday. And I go to my office 9 a.m. Monday morning, not even 24 hours later. And somebody has left a family-sized pack about the very thing I was admitting I was trying to quit on my desk. So I'm just saying.
This is agape love at its finest.
None of y'all would have done that if I said I was trying to quit smoking. Like I would not have walked into a pack of cigarettes on my desk. Would not have happened. But I've not completed a whole sleeve in 3 days, so I've done better than I've done most of the pandemic around here. We're very proud of me. Yes. So let's read 12 and 13 just so we can say we did the whole book of the Bible in one night. And then I've got one kind of closing question for us with some goodness and some happy things. So he says in verse 12, although I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk to you face to face so that our joy may be complete, which John is affirming that Zoom is no fun. From the very beginning, that face to face is way better than Zoom. And then 13 says, the children of your elect sister send you their greetings. So there's normally like the closings of these letters were like just as lavish and grace and peace and mercy and and this one's like, listen, we covered that. See ya. Oh, by the way, your friends say sup fam, right?
I got a Netflix show to go binge watch. Peace out.
Yeah, exactly. Like I gotta go jump on another call. Like it's 3:00 in the afternoon, the Zoom call's going a little long. Be like, well, I gotta go make dinner. But what I see here in 13 is, even in a short letter, really correcting some massive wrongs. John, or the author, still includes a connection of churches, and the early church, I think, did such a great job being in connection with one another, and they had no choice, right? They were an oppressed religion in the area. Yeah. So it was connection by necessity. And so one of the joys of being United Methodist is this connectional polity that we have, and it's great 80% of the time, and then it's the 20% of the time that we really hate it, right? Because we are connectional, and it's hard to be connectional. I have experienced, things like General Conference that have to be translated into 5 different languages simultaneously. That's hard work. And we engage in that. And so I wanted to hear from either one of you, what's the best part about being connected with folks who attend other churches? And feel free to take this from the very pro-Methodist stance or not.
David, you want to go first? I think I went first last time.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think about it as the same thing. It started to dawn on me recently that even just by showing up at church, you are encouraging your neighbor without saying anything, because it's kind of like, when you go to a bad movie and you're sitting by yourself in the theater and you start to question, like, if no one else is here, why am I spending this time on here? And so
That's what you think when you're in a movie theater alone?
Well, no, now I'm thinking I'm alone for 2 hours. This is fantastic.
I'm like, I hope no one else just
right. Or, so better example, right? Go back to college, and there were cool bars and cool clubs and not cool clubs. And so you walk into the not cool one, no one's there, and you're like, wait a minute, shouldn't I know something about this? And so I think when you show up to church, and even if you don't talk to somebody else, they're affirmed because somebody else decided to make that choice too. And they're signifying that this was a right choice, this was a good place to be, and I'm affirmed because other people have chosen that. And so I think that being connected in the church that we're in, the connectional sense is we get to see other people making this choice constantly. We get to, we have all these newsletters and emails and stories that are shared around, and we get to see that it's worth it. And we get to see and be uplifted that continuing in the truth and continuing in ministry is really a life-giving thing, even when it can be frustrating on the local level. And then the other part of it, so besides the affirming piece too, I think for me, I'm Sandy, I'm very big on humility as a very important part of our Christian walk. And I went into that a little earlier. And I think the scope of the connectional church and the scope of the church universal is humbling to me, because I think we would turn into false prophets really quickly if it was just our little corner at Stacy and Country Club. Or in Rockwall, right? I think we turn into false prophets because we only see outside of our window, or maybe not even look outside our window. And to have the connectional church to wrestle with and argue with, and I started to develop a relationship with the campus pastor of a larger mega church down the street, and we've had some really great coffees to find out just how similar our experiences are, even though our theologies may be a little different. And it's incredibly humbling to realize that God can work outside of my personality, or my activity, to realize that God's bigger than me. And I think that's one of the values. So
I was on a conference a few weeks ago that the United Methodist Commission on the Status and Role of Women put together, and Nadia Boltz-Weber was one of the speakers. And she said, we have bishops because of people like me. So she affirmed connectional polity, even though she's Episcopalian, I believe. But that made me think, we have bishops because of people like me. Like, this is why we're connectional. Sandy, do you have an answer? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's so good. I think one of my favorite examples, it still sticks with me today, it was when I was a lay person just getting to know the United Methodist Church, but our pastor was emphasizing this project called No More Malaria, and it was these nets and to raise money for that. And I think what I was fascinated with is to find out that the church down the road was doing the same emphasis and campaign, and the one that's 2 towns over was doing that. And I think that was my first real experience of connectionalism with the United Methodist Church, and how you could have such a monumentous task. There's how in the world do you stop something like malaria in an entire country? But when you have everybody pulling together in the same direction and they're really truly united in the mission and what they're trying to accomplish, you could really do accomplish amazing things. You're not doing it by yourself. You're empowered by the Holy Spirit. You're drawn together in that way. And I still love that about being a connectional denomination. I also love it because we have it's so nice to know that you're not an island. From a clergy standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
I can lean on my clergy brothers and sisters for questions and advice, and pull together. We can, when there's a church across town that's so very different, but this still is a United Methodist church, we can come together and try to learn from one another. Even though we're in this tradition together, but you look really different than I look. And we seem to be split on whatever issue, but let's have a conversation and dialogue, because clearly we're United Methodists and we're all in this together. There's so much I love about the connectionalism. Also, to what you said, David, I was going to add something like that too, is that I love that it keeps us humble. And I think it's unlikely that you're going to have an entire church just follow this Messiah type of a pastor. I don't think that our tradition really lets that happen. You get moved around, but but I think
it's an 80-20 rule. It's 80% great.
Yeah.
You can't get too big for your britches. The connection won't let that happen. The church won't let that happen. But there are so many things I love about it being connectional.
And I would add the way that the way that we do things in connection, not just across from church to church, but even the involvement of lay people. Like, we don't just have a board of elders, we have a rotating group of lay people that consistently keep each other honest. Like, there's a series of checks and balances that we get to bring in gifts that we might have missed, but we also get to hold back those who might be a little prideful as well, and including the pastor. So sorry, Keri Lynn.
Yeah. No, I wanted to add, just in closing, I think the reason that I believe so much in connectional polity and the way in which we all do church together this way is why at the beginning of doing Bible study, I said to David, I think we should get other people on here who are not us, because as much fun as it is just to make fun of David with no backup, I had to have some helpers around here. But it's been and Sandy, I'm a little sentimental because you're our last guest. Before we launch into, I know next week's just me and David, and then we're gonna have kids from our congregation on as our special guest. So you're our last non-Creekwood guest. So part of me is really sentimental that this kind of part of connecting is coming to a close, but it's good. But that's why we wanted to do this. We got to bring in people from the Texas conference that David knows really well. We got to bring in some folks who are not ordained or not clergy, but work as lay pastors and lay youth directors. We had some candidates for ministry on. And there were times, I said this morning in Katie's Bible study, I think there were times, and David, I don't mean to speak on behalf of you, but I think there were times where we were both delightfully uncomfortable in a way that was challenging. And that's really important for how we do this thing of life and faith together. And so I'm just a little sentimental because this season of doing ministry this way is going to evolve and change and look different. So
thanks for being our rock star. Like, you were our big finale.
Yes.
Sandy, she really was the best person to study with, because she held to my philosophy of over preparing for everything. So she was perfect to have on tonight.
Oh, well, I've enjoyed this very much. It's been such a fun experience. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining us.
David, do we have any more announcements? I don't think we have anything weird or crazy this week other than just our normal crazy.
Normal crazy. And don't forget, Rosie reminded us earlier about Blessing of the Animals. At 4:30 on Sunday. If you do have students, there's Halloween parties at different times up by the barn. I think 5th and 6th grade is at 3:00. Confirmations at like 4:30 or no. I don't remember. Worship's at 4:30. It's on the website. Go look at that. So yeah, so if you do have a student, they're actually like they're doing an in-person event, so you should take advantage of that. And then bring your cats and dogs, iguanas, horses, and black bears and whatever else out to the parking lot to
Goldfish.
Goldfish.
We'll bless
That
them.
would be, we could do that. I was just thinking like a bear in the wild is the one like major animal in a national park I've never seen live. And not that I want to get too close, but I really think it would be cool to see one. And we just got back from Colorado and still didn't see a bear. So if anybody has a bear they want to bring the blessing of the animals, keep it safely away from me and I'll bless it. That'd be really cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for commenting along. Kathy and Kelly and Steve and everybody else who stayed with us and who will watch later. We're super grateful for all of you. Sandy, thank you again for being our guest. And that's all I've got.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks. You all have a really great week.
Thanks. You too.
Bye, everyone.